Hi, I'm Transtina, and I want to talk about Critical Role. Content warning. This video contains discussions of genocide, both historical and ongoing. Also, this video contains spoilers for the first 3 campaigns of Critical Role, though I will mostly be focusing on Campaign 3. For those of you who don't know, Critical Role is a show where a
bunch of us nerdy ass voice actors sit around and play Dungeons and Dragons.
More seriously, it is a D&D actual play show starring a bunch of voice actors. If you're still lost, basically they play D&D and film it, and people watch it, including me. I really like this show. I've been a fan of it for a number of years now. I actually really like listening to it while I'm falling asleep. I don't know why, but it does, usually, really help me to fall asleep, and that is something that I've really struggled with since, apparently, I was a baby. Or so my mother tells me, anyway. The first 3 campaigns of the show are all set in the same world and all feature interconnected plots, to varying degrees. They recently-ish, I'm getting to this late, finished their 3rd campaign, and I thought it provided a really interesting framework for talking about fantasy storytelling. Namely, the question of how you handle gods in a fantasy story. Before we get into it though, I do want to quickly address a criticism that I expect this video might get, which is, it's their game, not yours, why do you care how they play? And really, the answer to that question is that I respect Critical Role too much to do that. I could make the argument that it's clearly produced as a show that has a high production budget and makes a lot of money, which is not wrong per se, but that's not what it is for me. It really is that the show is good. They're clearly telling real stories and exploring real themes and ideas, so I don't think that it is relevant that it's using D&D actual play as a medium. So I would argue that it is fair to analyze and critique it as the work of art that it is. And for the record, I will have some criticisms in this video, but I am definitely still a Critical Role fan. I like the show. I like Campaign 3. So let's just all be calm about this, shall we? Section 1. On the Nature of Gods. The first question to ask about a fictional religion is, are the gods confirmed to be real? In real life, the answer is obviously no. There's no evidence that God exists, nor is there evidence that God does not exist. I am not religious myself, but my understanding is that this is kind of the point. It isn't faith if you're believing in something that you know for a fact, right? Fantasy stories, including Critical Role, tend to take the opposite approach. The gods just exist, and there is nothing more to say about it. I actually don't have a problem with this. I think this is a perfectly valid and interesting storytelling choice, especially for something like D&D where, for example, the magic of clerics is drawn directly from the divine power of the gods. No, the first question that I want to talk about is, are the gods people, or are they part of nature? There are 2 facets to this question, though. First, let's talk about this in terms of their origin. Where did the gods come from? More precisely, the way I mean this question is that nature is stuff that has always been there, whereas people came from somewhere. This is obviously a flawed dichotomy. There is no meaningful separation between humanity and nature, except that of our own construction, and thinking that there is a separation has led to us causing a lot of harm for all the residents of our planet. Hopefully, though, you'll see what I'm getting at. As far as I'm aware, I'm not a historian, all real-world religions treat gods as a part of nature, at least in this way. It doesn't even really make sense to ask where the gods came from. They're gods. They've always been there. That's the point. Now hang on a second, you might be saying. In ancient Greek mythology, the gods weren't always around, which is a fair point. In ancient Greek mythology, the gods overthrew the Titans to become the rulers of the world. However, the gods are the children of the Titans. There is no meaningful distinction between the gods and the Titans other than their eras of rule. We can trace this back a little farther. The Titans are the children of Gaia, Gaia is the child of chaos, or something like that, and eventually we reach something that has always been there. So, yeah, I do think that this religion treats the gods as being part of nature, at least in this way. The second facet of this is morality. How do you judge the morality of a god? Is it even possible? Real-world religions tend to come down on the side of saying that it isn't possible, and I think that, on some level, this is due to viewing the gods as a part of nature. We don't, for example, say that it is immoral for a wolf to eat a rabbit, do we? Things are a little bit more nuanced than this, though. In ancient Greek mythology, the gods are sort of viewed as both people and part of nature simultaneously. Sometimes, Poseidon will destroy an island due to petty human reasons of emotion and whatnot, but other times he will do it because that is just what he does. That being said, when the religion was actually practiced, criticizing the gods was much less common, even for the actions that they were understood to have done for more human reasons. The reason for this, I feel, is better explored in Christianity. Beliefs here vary, of course, but I think it is fair to say that mainstream Christianity views God as a person, at least in the sense that his actions do have morality associated with them. However, the belief tends to be that his actions are always inherently good, even if it doesn't seem like it to us. Think, God works in mysterious ways, and the like. So, it's okay that he has so much power and control because he knows better than we do and his actions are for our own good, even if it seems like he's hurting us. Now, I don't want to put doubt on the things people believe, that isn't really my place, but I can't help but notice that this philosophical idea is very convenient for those who have power in our real society. It is a common instinct in world building, I think, to want to have an answer to every question. Where do the gods come from is a natural question to ask, making it extremely tempting to give the gods an origin story. This is what happens in Critical Role. The gods are given an elaborate origin story, and it has some interesting implications. Section 2. The Fictional World. The first 3 Critical Role campaigns are set in the fictional world of Exandria, which is, for our purposes, a fairly standard D&D setting. There are medieval kingdoms and nations, there are dragons, there is magic, and so on and so forth. There's a lot more to it than this, of course, but we aren't really interested in that. We are interested in the gods of this world. Originally, the gods came from somewhere else. It isn't clarified exactly where, nor do I think it should be, but it only really matters that it is elsewhere. Eventually, though, their simple, idyllic life is shattered as this other place is attacked by a being called Predathos, an entity that eats gods as its source of energy. The gods run, naturally, and eventually end up in Exandria. When they get there, they find that it is already inhabited. Exandria is the homeland of the elementals. In this new land, the gods saw opportunity and began to forge a home for themselves. Initially, the gods and the elementals were able to coexist peacefully, and together, they shaped the raw chaos of Exandria into something new. Prominent among their creations are the mortals, sentient but short-lived life forms created by the gods to inhabit this world. Somewhere in this time period, Predathos arrived in Exandria, still hungry and still chasing the gods. Working together, the gods and elementals created a prison for Predathos, where it remained trapped for eons. Eventually, though, the gods went too far, took too much, and the elementals became enraged. They began to fight against the gods, and, in doing so, they either intentionally began to slaughter the mortals, or the mortals just became collateral damage. In either case, the gods were split on how this should be handled. On one side of the conflict, the gods that would come to be known as the prime deities believed that it was their responsibility to protect the mortals they had created. On the other side, the gods who would come to be known as the betrayer gods believed that it was more important for them to keep the old agreements with the elementals. This led to a war between the gods, which would eventually culminate in an event known as the Divergence. The prime deities won the war, destroyed and sealed the elementals, and created the Divine Gate, a magical barrier that separates the divine realms of the gods from Exandria. They did this in response to the utter devastation that these conflicts wreaked upon the mortals. To be clear though, the way I describe this does make the betrayer gods look kind of good, but they also suck. They are incredibly cruel and callous towards the mortals, not even really viewing them as living things, which is also contemptible. Anyway, maybe this is just me, but I can't help but feel that parts of this story feel extremely familiar. Section 3. Colonialism. I speak these words from Turtle Island, within the occupying state known as Canada. The history of Turtle Island is absolutely not one-to-one with the backstory of Exandria, but there are enough parallels that I still think it is worth talking about. When European colonizers came to Turtle Island, they did so for the singular purpose of finding and extracting as many resources as possible. This is, to be clear, very different from the motivation of the gods of Exandria, but it is still true. It would, however, have been inconvenient to try to eliminate the indigenous peoples all at once, so the occupation has used, and continues to use, a veneer of peaceful coexistence to disguise its genocidal aims. Or, being a little more generous, maybe people just believe that, this time, the occupation will coexist peacefully, despite all historical evidence to the contrary. PhilosophyTube has a fantastic video about this that I would highly recommend. Now, I know that there's some controversy about this video, so I actually wanted to take a minute to address it. In a nutshell, this video focuses on American history and talks about the philosophical and legal justifications that colonizers used throughout the process of colonizing what would become the US. The main issue that people have with this video is this part.
This is a bigger topic than we have time to get into today, but PhilosophyTube's audience has a diversity of political views, and I'm sure some of you will be drawing parallels between the process that the United States went through with American Indians and the process Israel has gone through with Palestinians since it was founded in 1948. Illegal settlements, crimes by settlers tolerated by government, American presidents saying they want to just move in and take over the land. Our question for today is, why is America the way that it is? And today, in America, many people are protesting the actions of the Israeli government. You may have heard people describe Israel as a settler colonial state or as genocidal, and these historical parallels are partly why they say that. I am aware that Israeli scholars have their responses, that the US and Israel are not the only countries to instantiate this pattern or something very close to it, and that a proper treatment of this subject would need to be done at length with due concern for the global rise in anti-Semitic hate crime that we've seen over the last few years. Again, much bigger topic than we have time to get into today. However, it would be kind of weird if I didn't point out the fact that whilst history may not repeat itself, it sure does rhyme.
So, apparently, this does not condemn the genocide in Gaza strongly enough. Some people are characterizing this as cowardly and both sidesy. So, first of all, this most definitely is not both sidesy. She is directly calling out the genocide and not making any excuses for it. One specific issue a lot of people seem to be taking is with the part where she mentions rising anti-Semitism, saying that this shouldn't matter for a discussion of the ongoing genocide being perpetrated by the State of Israel. I understand where this is coming from, I even partially agree with it, but it is definitely true that anti-Semites are using the genocide as a way to demonize all Jewish people, and that is important to talk about. Anti-Semitism does matter, and it is vitally important that we don't let fascists infiltrate any of our movements. More broadly, though, this entire section reads to me like Abby knows what the Zionist counter-arguments to condemning the genocide are going to be, and has decided to preemptively respond to them. I don't see any reasonable way of framing that as not being pro-Palestine. This is a much bigger topic than I have time for in this video, but to put it simply, people really like dogpiling trans women. Like, really like it. And if they can convince themselves that they are helping a progressive cause, like fighting for Palestinian liberation, while doing so, then they love it so much more. So yeah, in conclusion, the video is good. Ignore the controversy surrounding it. It's basically just a bunch of trans misogynists doing trans misogyny again. That being said, though, there is a valid criticism of the video that I have seen, which is that she uses the word Indian to refer to indigenous people. I won't defend this, but I will say that this is a common misconception. A lot of people, especially those who don't live here, tend to be under the impression that this is one of the terms preferred by indigenous people, especially in academic and legal contexts, which is the basis for her video. I don't blame you if you aren't willing to look past this, but it seems to me like an honest mistake made by someone trying to do her best. That's just me though, I know I'm not part of the group targeted by this. Anyway, returning to the topic at hand, I want to zoom in on one specific case. The numbered treaties that Canada made with various Indigenous nations. In theory, the treaties are designed to enshrine the rights of Indigenous people to certain lands and to formally purchase parts of so-called Canada. In practice, the Indigenous peoples were mostly coerced into disadvantageous deals that stripped them of much of their ancestral homeland. Even if the agreements were everything that the occupation claimed them to be, though, they still wouldn't actually mean much, because the occupation did not hold their end of the agreements anyway. For example, the Canadian state has violated treaties that promised land and water to Indigenous peoples many times, including, relatively recently, for the sake of building pipelines over that land. This illustrates the fact that the treaties never really mattered. The occupation views that land as theirs, regardless of any promises that they have made. The thing that makes this most clear, though, is the history of stealing children from indigenous peoples for the sake of integrating them into colonizer society. First of all, this was a violation of the treaties, but more than that, it proves that the end goal here was to eliminate the indigenous nations. Let's not mince words here. That is an act of genocide. Sure, they might not be slaughtering people, but it still serves to eliminate the culture and the people. It is genocide. Now, I know that this is a very heavy topic for a video that is about Critical Role, but I bring it up because this is the history that all white colonizers on Turtle Island have to live with, including me, and including the cast of Critical Role. I don't think that these parallels are intentional, I mean, I really don't know, but it seems to me like this discomfort that we all have to live with may have influenced this aspect of the world building. Now, this stuff mostly stays in the background for the first two campaigns, but that all changes with the third campaign. Section 4. Anti-Colonial Violence. The events of Campaign 3 center around the character of Ludinus Deleth. He is an interesting character, to say the least. During the Divergence, the gods destroyed much of the mortal civilizations that had been created. There are various reasons for this, but most telling to me is the city that was completely annihilated because they had developed a weapon that was capable of killing a god. In fact, the prime deities and the betrayers had formed a truce for the sole purpose of destroying this weapon. This reflects extremely badly on the gods. They are allowed to kill mortals with barely a thought, but the idea that mortals would become anything close to their equal was so unthinkable that they were willing to wipe out an entire civilization to avoid it. Ludinus has been alive since this period, and he never forgave the gods for what they did. Rightly, in my opinion. That being said, while I may agree with his motivations, I definitely think that his methods are monstrous. He has lived far beyond his natural lifespan by harvesting the magical energy of fey creatures, which are living creatures, to be clear. He has used this time to plan, and Campaign 3 is where his plan comes to fruition. He intends to unleash Predathos once more, killing the gods once and for all. This is, I think we can all agree, a bad plan that is not morally defensible, in almost any way. That being said, I understand how we got to this point. First of all, the suffering that Ludinus caused and was willing to cause is almost nothing when compared to the destruction caused by the gods. But more than that, he is engaging in an act of anti-colonial violence. It is an extreme act of anti-colonial violence, yes, but that is what it is, and it is understandable to me how it got that extreme. Milder acts of anti-colonial violence, the weapon that could kill one god, for instance, were used as justification for eradicating vast segments of the population. So, what else is there to do but to escalate? Now, I'm extremely confident that this wasn't the intention of anyone involved, but I can't help but feel like this is also extremely familiar. On October 7th, 2023, in occupied Palestine, the forces of the Al-Aqsa Brigades launched an attack on the occupying state of Israel. I think most of us would agree that the attack was very extreme, targeting civilians, and I hope that most of us would agree that this is bad, both morally and tactically. However, any moral accounting of this action needs to address the full history. First, in any comparison of actions of the occupation and of the Palestinian resistance, it is undeniable that the occupation has caused infinitely more suffering and death, even before the catastrophic escalation of the ongoing genocide that occurred as retaliation for the October 7th attack, which, as Philosophy 2 points out, is something that happened on Turtle Island as well. Second, the history of Palestinian resistance did not start with the October 7th attack. Earlier actions were far less extreme. Many of them were peaceful demonstrations, but they still resulted in the occupation retaliating with extreme genocidal force. More than that, groups that were working towards liberation in a purely peaceful manner, such as the Palestinian Authority, were undermined by the occupation in favor of Hamas, the government in Gaza that is now being decried by the nations of the Imperial Core as a terrorist organization. Like I said, I don't think that these parallels are in this story intentionally, but it is undeniable that they are there. Now, I want to take a second to zoom in a bit on the reaction of the fandom to all this. Normally, I try to avoid fandom stuff as I find that it is a massive waste of time, but I think this is worth talking about. In particular, there were members of the fandom describing Ludinus's plan as genocidal, and, to be honest, within the context of the show, they are not exactly wrong. The gods are, in fact, a separate species from the mortals, and Ludinus's plan will wipe them all out. I find this disturbing, to say the least. I think that it is dangerous to invent a fictional scenario in which anti-colonial violence can legitimately be viewed as genocidal. In the real world, the October 7th attack has been called genocidal and has been compared to the Holocaust. I won't mince words. Framing the attack this way is disingenuous and incredibly racist. Framing anti-colonial violence as if it is genocidal towards the occupying population is an incredibly common tactic used to justify colonialism, especially in the case of Palestine, where anti-Semitism is a legitimate concern. Ultimately, though, it makes me extremely uncomfortable that this is a narrative that Critical Role perpetuates, even by accident. And maybe I'm projecting here, but it really feels like I was not the only one feeling this way. In particular, throughout the campaign, we see the player characters, if you're new to TTRPGs, just main characters basically. Anyway, we see the player characters struggle immensely with what side they should take. There's this deep-rooted idea in our culture that, while our current economic and political mode might not be perfect, anyone who is trying to change it would just make things worse. This is, of course, a dangerous idea, since it completely defangs any criticism of the current system without needing to go through the hassle of proving its merits. We can really see that instinct play out throughout the campaign. On multiple occasions, the player characters theorize that Ludinus must have an ulterior motive. Surely, he isn't just doing this out of a desire to end the system enforced by the gods and their followers, because if he is, then opposing him would require seriously weighing the benefits and drawbacks of this system and deciding that it is better than any alternative. That being said, of course, not all revolutionaries are created equal. It is absolutely possible to have a revolution, overthrow the current system, and replace the system with something worse. I mean, hells, that is basically what most fascists want to do. It is also possible to attempt to overthrow the system to replace it with something better, and, in so doing, cause an immense amount of suffering, something that I do not think is morally justifiable. Within the context of a story, though, if the only revolutionaries you ever show are those who will cause incredible suffering, you are reinforcing the narrative that I mentioned before, that trying to replace the system will inevitably end up making things worse. Because of this, I found myself increasingly uncomfortable with Critical Role the show, and especially with its fandom, who have mostly jumped into a full-throated defense of the status quo. I did, however, decide to finish out the campaign, mostly because I respect the artists behind the show enough to see where they're going with this. And while the ending wasn't everything that I had wanted it to be, I did find myself to be pleasantly surprised by how this plotline was resolved. So, let's talk about the conclusion. Section 5. Decolonization. Every anti-colonial movement that I am familiar with has the same fundamental goal. Colonization stole their land from them, and they want it back. Many, usually the colonizers, will try to frame this as genocidal, but this is wrong for two fundamental reasons. First, most indigenous people don't actually want to remove all of the colonizers from the land. They just want to share the land in an equal way. For example, many Palestinians support a one-state solution, a single, democratic Palestinian state in which Palestinians and Israelis are both able to live with the same rights. For the record, this is also the solution I support. Well, I actually support a no-state solution, but I don't think that's likely to happen anytime soon. Anyway, the second and more important reason is that even if indigenous people did want to remove all the colonizers from their land, I don't really think we have a right to be mad about that. I mean, if you think about it, we are really just scared that they would do the same thing to us that we did to them. Now, I obviously don't want indigenous people to remove all the colonizers from their land. That would not be pleasant for me, but I also wouldn't really have the moral right to complain about it. So yeah, all colonizer states must be destroyed. No exceptions. Unfortunately, Campaign 3 does not exactly end with full decolonization, but it does come closer than I had expected. As events are coming to a close, and Ludinus is executing his plan to free Predathos, the player characters meet with two of the gods, the Archheart and the Raven Queen, each of whom are at least sympathetic to Ludinus's motivations, if not his methods. The player characters, together with these two gods, form a plan. Predathos will eat the gods, yes, but it isn't interested in mortals at all. In fact, it barely even perceives the mortals, its perspective so alien to our own. So, why not use Predathos as a threat, and offer the gods the chance to become mortal and live among their subjects? This is exactly what ends up happening. The gods will live as mortals, endlessly reincarnating to live alongside their subjects forever. Or, at least, until they get confident enough that Predathos won't come back. But this adds the element that the show is missing. If you are going to do a story about flawed or immoral revolutionaries, you need to include examples of what good revolutionaries look like. Otherwise, you are just reinforcing the dominant ideology, regardless of your intentions. I wish that the show had been more clear about these ideas, not waiting until the end to get there, but the fact that they did get there goes a long way towards tying the story up nicely. Now, this isn't exactly decolonization, since control of the land isn't returned to the elementals, nor do the elementals live alongside the gods and mortals as equals. It is also not exactly a revolution, since the religious structures used to maintain support for the rule of the gods are still intact. It does, however, flatten one hierarchy of power, gods versus non-gods. That is absolutely not enough, but it is a damn good start. We must fight, however, until all people of all nations are free. From the river to the sea, Palestine is all you'll see. Thanks for watching.
First things first, free Gaza. I need Elon's body dropping. I need TNT in Congress. I need Luigi in my roster. Getting janitorial, got no street sweeper. Big fan of dead leaders. VIP meet and greet them. Treat any money mo. How I treat my CEO like Bird, but all I can see now. Just the other day, I was scrolling on my phone though, trying to cope with the notion that I'm culpable. Saw the trolley pound at the POTUS with a locomotive. Band together first, then focus on your locomotive. 756, really it's a low total. Come get in the mix. Teach you how to toe the pole. Walking with a stick, hits up from a stone's throw. Since you love big tech, got forward. Get a 187 on a piggy if you want to make a difference. SpaceX ain't the only ones with a mission. My team got the rocket.